back to the channel. I hope you are doing really well. In today's video, I wanted to share with you strategies that I use to help manage my team's workload. Now, not that long ago, I posted a video just sharing with you the strategies that I use to manage my own teacher workload, both as a classroom teacher, but also as a head of department. And in today's video, I thought it would be interesting to just collate all of the ideas and strategies that I use to manage the workload of the people in my department. Now, if you are new here, hi, hello, my name is Sophia and I'm a science teacher in a large secondary school in London and a head of department. And I run this little community page here on YouTube just to share my own teaching experience and teacher advice. So if you enjoy this content, then please make sure to subscribe to the channel and to like this video. So when I first started my head of department role, it took me by surprise just how much I needed to organise all of the deadlines and information that I communicated with my team. So I quickly understood that there needed to be some systems in place to help alleviate that communication so that it wasn't repetitive or confusing, but also to create some documentation that I could put in place to help support teachers with managing their own workload so that they could meet deadlines without forgetting important information. In this video, I'm going to share with you 8 ways that I manage my team's workload, and also I will share with you some ideas that I'd love to implement in the future that I think might make the difference. So if you are a fellow middle leader, or if you're someone that is aspiring to be a middle leader, then I hope that these tips are useful, and if they are, please let me know in the comments down below which one has resonated the most with you, and I'd also be super curious to know what other tips you have. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. So my first strategy is to actually have a curriculum folder that has all of the topics really well organised for the entire curriculum year. I created an Excel document that is called the curriculum overview document, and that just maps out what each year group is being taught at what different stage of the academic year, and it signposts all of the topic codes that are then equally and similarly organised into their subject folders. In each of the subject folders, I have sequentially planned all of the lessons into subfolders, and in each of those there is a lesson PowerPoint that staff can use that signposts the really important core knowledge that has to be taught in those lessons, but also it has some starter retrieval questions, examples of expert explanations that need to be taught in that lesson, with some examples of checking for understanding and independent tasks that students can engage with. I also try to make sure that in each of the topic folders that we are teaching our students, that there are relevant worksheets and answers to those worksheets so that teachers can use that if they need. Now, the idea of this curriculum folder is that staff can use it as and when they need it, but it also gives them a little bit of a benchmark or a template that they can fall back onto if they needed some additional guidance or support. We have written a new scheme of work for Key Stage 3, and at the moment we are writing that for our Year 10s because we have done an exam board change from Edexcel to AQA. So our curriculum work is in progress, and it's something that I've understood staff need a little bit more support with, so organising that and streamlining that was really essential. The final thing I just wanted to mention about developing the curriculum and making sure that everything is very easy to understand is that I have signposted in our subject meeting time, so where we meet as a subject, one of the key priority areas for us is to spend time doing some collaborative planning. And so I think that is really essential because then it means that the curriculum becomes ours instead of something that needs to be followed. It also helps to make sure that everyone knows what needs to be taught when, and also when it needs to be finished by, as it informs assessments in the future. And so having that constant communication about what curriculum topics students are learning is really important. That leads me on to my second strategy, which is that I have designed an assessment schedule. Now, this assessment schedule was something that I put in place well before the academic year, so that on the first day of the academic year in September, staff knew exactly when students were going to be completing assessments. This was important for me to do an academic year ahead because I had trialled before just doing it a half term in advance. And one of the things I found was that it didn't really help to manage the team's workload because then several members of staff were hit by really intense crunch points of marking several year groups. And so by mapping that out across the whole academic year to make sure that both the school's assessment policy was being followed, but also our department's own feedback policy was also being followed, whilst keeping really in mind teacher workload with marking load. So in this assessment schedule, I made sure that every single year group had an assessment each term, because that is our school's policy that there is red marking during that time. But then also I've signposted in it when would the revision list be posted, when the assessment was taking place, when the marking took place, and then when the dirt lessons would take place for students to engage with feedback. In all of this, I found that there were potentially about 3 ways in which staff would benefit from reading this information. So I did an overview page initially, all color-coded, and then I also signposted things sequentially throughout the academic year by half term, and then I finally concluded the document with a year group overview. This meant that whatever member of staff was using this document, if they only taught a particular year group, then they could focus on that aspect. But then if they did teach several year groups, they would be able to see at which weeks or which points in the year they were going to be hit more by particular marking. Creating this document was definitely time consuming, but I have to say that it was really instrumental in communicating deadlines then on a weekly basis, because I had done all of the planning workload and I could now just read that document to remind myself of when the assessments needed to be designed and when revision lists needed to be posted, but also when I needed to signpost my staff to schedule those assessments, mark them, and when the deadline would be. With the assessments, I also made sure that in our subject meeting time when we met as a department, we would have dedicated time to mark together, moderate some of the questions that we had marked, and also discuss some ideas about how we were going to give students feedback so that students could make more progress in the future. And my school is also trialling an approach about deadlines in which we report home assessments. And this is now that the deadline is on a Tuesday rather than on a Monday, to give staff that extra day after a weekend to enter the data onto our reporting trackers so that everything can then be sent home accurately. And then as a department head, I'm able to check and quality assure that reporting without it being the very first day back from a weekend. My third tip in managing my team's workload is that I noticed that a lot of staff were really struggling to set homework, mark the homework and check which students had completed it and which ones hadn't, and then do the appropriate follow-up. So I've actually taken that out of their hands essentially, and I've standardized the homework centrally to all students from year 7 to year 11. And the way that I've done that is using an online platform that does quizzing following the curriculum. So I just assign different quizzes to each year group on a weekly basis, and then I set up an automatic weekly reminder so that students know to do that piece of homework. I also standardized the day in which that piece of homework was going to be set and due straight from September. And all I've asked my teachers to do is to check in regularly the mark books and to have those conversations with students if they haven't done it. It means that setting the homework, communicating with home, and marking that homework is all done for my staff, and so they can just focus on having the meaningful conversations with students to engage them and motivate them with this independent practice. I'm also able to monitor progress across the different classes because the platform gives me this ability to compare the data and performance of different cohorts. And so I'm able to use that information to then plan the homework that I want to set in the future. It's definitely been a little bit of a trial and error process, but I think I've learned a lot from doing it, and there's a little bit more that I would like to achieve in the future. But in terms of managing my team's workload, I definitely think it has helped them. That brings me on to my fourth tip. So because we use Google Classroom as the way in which we communicate information to students about homework, revision materials, revision lists, etc., I have access to cohort classes instead of each individual class. And so I'm able to communicate something to each individual year group, some important information about an upcoming assessment or some revision lists or topics or materials or their homework. In doing this, it means that I don't need to ask individual staff members to upload a particular document onto Google Classroom and risking maybe 1 or 2 members of staff not doing that just because they forgot. It takes that burden away from them, particularly if it is an action that is just being repeated. I found a way to just standardize that. And I've also standardized communication with parents and carers. I will just use our admin team who are really kind in sending emails in bulk to parents. I'll just prepare an email that might give reminders about our curriculum, about our expectations, about something that is coming up in the future, and that just sets expectations with parents and carers and really supports us in knowing that they might have communicated that with the students. And so then it does a little bit of that extra legwork for us, and it means that the time that we might need to spend communicating things with students is reduced. I also think that this is quite important because a lot of my teachers were getting emails with questions about things that I knew the answer to, and I could just preempt that by sending an email home. And so I found it quite useful to send information such as things to year 9s and how the setting was going to be done for the beginning of GCSEs, or signposting families to when upcoming assessments were going to happen, or upcoming competitions, or even expectations about how the homework should be done or how students can be the most successful with revising for science. Now, my 5th tip is something I've been doing for nearly 2 years now, which is to send a weekly science bulletin to my department. I send that every single Friday for the following week, and it just has different sections to detail information that is really important that I might have sent in an email, but this way, if it's centrally documented in this science bulletin, it means that when staff might have received way too many emails that week and might have missed some important information, that is definitely there for them to read it. I will always make sure at the top of the science bulletin are the key reminders of upcoming deadlines and things that are the non-negotiables which must happen. And I also try to keep the science bulletin formatted in the same way so that if teachers only teach a particular year group, then they can just skip information that's not relevant to them. My next tip is all to do with timetabling. It is often overlooked how we assign classes to different teachers at the start of the academic year. And so for me, it was really important to think carefully about what that timetable allocation was going to look like. Firstly, because the topics that we teach the different year groups is obviously going to be different. And so if I've got a classroom teacher on almost maximum number of hours, I wanted to give that class teacher an extra class of the same year group so that they would be able to double up on their planning. But I did need to keep into consideration what it meant in terms of marking load, because then assessments fall at the same time for each year group. And so if a class teacher did have 3 classes of the same year group, then they would have 3 lots of marking to do. So marking at Key Stage 3 is a lot lighter than marking at Key Stage 4 and certainly at A level. So the last step that I'll do with this timetable allocation is just making sure that that marking spread of all of these class cohorts for each of those year groups is evenly distributed. And I will try my best always to make sure that no teacher is teaching the full 5 years from year 7 to year 13. I've also planned in advance parent evening allocations, and this is something that's important to me because they do take up an evening space. And now, whilst we could hold parents' evening for every single class that we teach, I thought that there might be an opportunity to reduce the number of parents' evenings that my team holds, particularly if they share that class with another teacher. So at the start of the academic year, I made sure to just communicate which classes each of my teachers was going to be holding the parents' evening for, so that they would know exactly which evenings across the academic year they were needed for parents' evening. It also meant that I could see that the parents' evenings were evenly distributed amongst my teachers and that no one was doing way too many and that no one was also doing way too little. And I make sure to share some parent evening guidance, and that can be some important things to just mention or questions to ask, but also how we use our data to inform the parents' evening conversations and how to analyze that data to spot trends or patterns in the data so that the feedback can be as accurate and as useful as possible. Now, I think I've mentioned in my very first tip, but my 7th tip is that I changed everything over to OneDrive. And that was really important because most of my staff were staying a little bit later than when they needed to. And that was because they were accessing things on our remote area. And so if they went home, they were going to struggle to access that. And so in order for me to promote them leaving school at a reasonable time or as early as they wanted to without feeling any guilt or shame and going home, and if they were wanting to work, then they would be able to access every single resource that they do at school as easy as that on OneDrive. And then they could do some of that prepping from home without needing to stay any later than they needed to, and obviously in the comfort of their own home, which is important to me. My last tip is that I've created a team priorities document to help manage all of the priorities that we have in our science leadership team. So obviously I'm head of department, but I have other people that work with me to lead on biology, on chemistry, on physics, on enrichment and trips. And so in order for us to ensure that every single thing gets done for each of those responsibilities, I have a document, and in that document I signpost what needs to be accomplished each week. It's a fairly easy document to use, and each of us will populate what we've got to do and what's coming up, but I'll also often pre-populate particular columns just to help staff know what the non-negotiables are. We'll then review that by rag rating it and colouring it in green when we've done it, in yellow when we've kind of started but not quite finished, and red where we just weren't able to do it. And if there's anything in our column that we might need a little bit more support with, then we'll ask someone and we'll just move it to someone else's column. I really appreciate this type of system because it's a flexible one and it's kind of a working document, and it just means that communication is then very, very easy. And there you have it. Now, there are some other key things that I would love to try to incorporate potentially next academic year to help manage my team's workload. The key issues that I have realized might cause a little bit of frustration or stress or a feeling of being overwhelmed is organizing cover. So often we will experience inevitably unplanned absence, and my school's expectation and policy is that we would have to sort out the cover for the lessons that we would have that day from home when we have called in sick. And so I would really love to take that burden away and try to find a strategy in which students would always have a piece of work to complete if their teacher wasn't there, and the teacher wouldn't need to prepare any of those resources. And so the idea that I had was to create a booklet at the start of the year with some of the most core and important information, and it'd be potentially a maximum of 10 lessons worth of work to complete. And each class would have their own set of booklets that we could then distribute to that class for any unplanned cover. It would obviously mean that on the day of that cover lesson, we would distribute those booklets, collect them back in and store them back in our filing cabinet. And if there was a second or a third or a ninth cover for the same class, then they would continue to use those booklets until it was done. So that's something that I'm quite keen to trial, and it's a little bit of work I'm going to do in the summer in preparation for next academic year, but I'll let you know how it goes. And the last thing I thought would be really helpful in supporting my team's workload is just to make sure that all of their teaching resources that they might need in the classroom, things like board pens and rubbers and whiteboards and lined paper and graph paper and exercise books, was always fully restocked. Now, it's up to most class teachers to just sort that out for themselves. And I think often what happens is if you teach a full day, you don't then have time to go to reprographics or to go to a stock cupboard and restock those resources, or even risk the fact that there won't be anything there. So one of the things that I really like to try is on a half-termly basis, finding a pocket of time, an hour or so, just to sort all of that out for my department and restock each of their classrooms, so then they always feel that they're all ready to go. And there you have it. I hope that you have found this video useful and it has given you some food for thought on ways that you could help manage your own workload, your team's workload, your department's workload. Let me know in the comment section down below which tip or strategy was your favourite. But even more important, I would love to know what tips you have so I could hopefully borrow some and trial them out. But yeah, if you have found this video useful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos in the future. And I will leave you there. Have a beautiful and joyous day, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.